Yet another member of the Pittsburgh Penguins is taking center stage when the NHL gets back on the international competition stage, and Hunter and I are going to talk about that right after this.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Patrick Damp. You can follow me on Twitter at synonym for wet. Joined as always by the one and only Hunter Hodes. You can follow him on Twitter at Hunter Hodes. You can give our show's account a follow at LO_Penguins. And we thank you for making this your first listener watch of the day, because we're your team every day. And don't forget that we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as YouTube. Before we get going today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as the playoffs wind down. The sports stop sportsing like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, despite where the Pittsburgh Penguins are as a franchise at this current moment, a lot of their front office and even some of their players are heading international. It was announced on Wednesday that Penguins president of hockey operations, Kyle Dubas, has been named to the Team Canada staff for the Four Nations Faceoff, as well as the 2026 Winter Olympics. So he will serve alongside Julien BriseBois on the staff for Team Canada. Kyle Dubas will be the director of player personnel. Meanwhile, Julien BriseBois, will be the assistant general manager for Team Canada, like I said, at both the Four Nations Faceoff as well as the Winter Olympics. So this is a really big honor for Kyle Dubas. And before we even get going, I want to just say this. I know people have their opinions on Kyle Dubas, what he did near the end with the Toronto Maple Leafs, what he's done so far with the Pittsburgh Penguins, but clearly they believe he's doing something right. And this is a gigantic honor for him, because even though Team Canada does have an absolute embarrassment of riches at their disposal, it's not easy putting together an international team. Just think back to the last few United States teams, whether it was World Cup, whether it was the 2014 Olympics. When these teams have been put together, there's been a lot of talent there for the U.S., but they have not done a good job at getting this together. So Canada is also looking to continue its dominance of the world stage, especially at the highest level. And Team Canada thinking that Kyle Dubas could help them in that is a huge honor.
I agree. And on one hand, his job should be fairly easy just because of how much talent Canada has overall. But on another hand, it's also going to be a bit difficult, because think of the amount of players that are going to be left off of Team Canada that are ridiculously good. I mean, we all know how stacked this roster is going to be, Pat, especially at forward. Defense are going to be stacked as well. Goaltending, I'll take a few other countries over them, especially the United States. I think the U.S. has a big advantage in net. I know Russia, if they're allowed to play in the Olympics in 2026, they will also have a big edge in net there. But as far as the Four Nations Faceoff, the next year's tournament, the U.S. will have a big advantage in net there. But again, just going back to Dubas, it is going to be a bit difficult just because you're going to be leaving a lot of very talented players out for that. And I think most of the players that you select for next year are probably going to be on the Olympics in 2026. Maybe a couple other players could be in the mix for that next year after that. But I would say 95% of the players that you select to this competition in 2025 will be on that team in 2026. But they obviously believe in him. Yes, he's had some failures in Toronto. He's had some failures in Pittsburgh. But you look at the staff that Canada has assembled here. Doug Armstrong, I mean, I personally don't think he's that good of an NHL general manager, but I understand it. Julien BriseBois, very good GM. You also have Jim Nill, very good. Don Sweeney, he's an assistant GM. He's done a very solid job in Boston. For the most part, Pat, that's an all-star caliber group of GMs in the NHL that are helping out Team Canada. And the fact that Dubas is there, that's a pretty good honor for him, considering how young he still is when you look at his age compared to a lot of the other GMs overall in this league.
Yeah, he's very much not an old hockey man,
No.
being surrounded by a lot of old hockey men. But I even then, like you were saying, like I know I goofed there and said the old hockey men, but like you said, those names that are on Team Canada's front office of the last 10 or so years, those are probably some of the best general managers from Canada in the National Hockey League. Like I do believe Doug Armstrong has lost a little bit of his fastball, but some of that is just the way the NHL is set up now. If you're not going to consistently be one of the better GMs, I also look at a guy like Julien Brisebois, who has done a phenomenal job since Steve Yzerman left the Tampa Bay Lightning. Even if I don't totally agree with what he did with Steven Stamkos, I mean, at the same time, even though I think that Tampa is going to take a step back this year, they're still a very good roster. They still have swung some incredible deals, and he's been right behind that. The Bruins are always the Bruins. So you look at Don Sweeney and think, okay, this guy has some kind of voodoo magic where he always makes a team that we're expecting to take a step back, stay right in the mix. And look at the Dallas Stars. I mean, has there been a team that has flown more under the radar, but still been that good, that consistently? Because we talk about how good they are once we get to playoff time, but it's almost just assumed at this point that, okay, the Dallas Stars are going to be right in the mix. We don't got to talk about them, but that's a big credit to him. And then I think you look at a guy like Kyle Dubas, that's a good, fresh perspective for Team Canada. I don't think he's going to overthink anything or try to play 4D chess, but it's another solid voice for Canada to have in the room.
Right. Yeah. When you're assembling those types of rosters, you want to have as many great voices in that room as possible. You're going to hopefully see it with Team USA as well for the Four Nations Faceoff and for the Olympics. And next year, you're going to see it for the other countries that are participating in the Four Nations Faceoff outside of Canada and the US next year, and then for the Olympics as well. The more all-star voices you have in that room, the better I think you should be overall. And I mean, we all know how great Canada is going to be again, people. We all know that they're going to be the favorite heading into that tournament. We all know they're going to be the favorite heading into 2026 unless they screw up some of these decisions. But I don't think that's probably going to happen just because of the amount of all-star talent that they already have. So yeah, you want to surround yourself with as many good voices in terms of GMs in this league as possible. Canada is doing that with these couple of moves. And honestly, I think Brisebois could honestly be the GM of this team.
He definitely could. So Dubas also joins Mike Sullivan, who will be the head coach of Team USA at the Four Nations Faceoff. Though unlike Canada, they didn't name him, I don't believe, also the Olympic head coach. We're still waiting to find out on that. So
I'd be stunned if it wasn't.
Yeah, I would be, unless he takes some sharp decline over the next 2 years. I think it's pretty safe to say, if nothing else, Mike Sullivan will be on the Team USA staff. And of course, he joins his captain, Sidney Crosby, who was named in the first group of players who will play for Team Canada, which, like you were saying, Hunter, just on the first few names that Team Canada put out there for the Four Nations Faceoff, Connor McDavid, Sidney Crosby, Nathan McKinnon, Brad Marchand, Braden Point, and Cale Makar. I mean, that lineup right there, how do you compete with that? I don't know how you do.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's insane. I know this is the best pool of talent that the United States has had in a long time, specifically during my generation, at least. But you look at what Canada can put out there outside of the players that you mentioned, Pat. I mean, Sam Reinhart, for example, Mark Stone, Connor Bedard is definitely going to be on that team. Matt Barzell, Mitch Marner, Zach Hyman, Steven Stamkos. I can keep going if you want me to. There is so much talent that Canada can put on that team, especially at forward. It's going to be fun seeing Canada and the U.S. going blow for blow at that position. But man, I'm definitely going to be at least a little bit freaked out considering the level of talent that they can put out there.
Well, and to your point, and to further mine a little bit, you also then look at the first six named for Team USA, and that includes Jack Eichel. Surprisingly for Hunter, Austin Matthews will play for Team USA, not Team Canada.
That's not even funny. You know, I made that stupid mistake 3 years ago. I know I'm going to get flamed for it. Yes, for those that maybe were not listening a few years ago, I made the dumbest mistake I think I've ever made on this show by saying that Austin Matthews was going to play for Team Canada. And after I listened to it, I'm like, yeah, I can't believe I even said that. So yeah, there's a fun moment for everyone.
Continuing that list after Matthews, Matthew Tkachuk, Adam Fox, Quinn Hughes, and Charlie McAvoy. So even though I look at that and go, oh, those are all very great players, you compare it to the first 6 outside of maybe Brad Marchand, who I think got named just because some of the games of the Four Nations Faceoff will be played in Boston. That's a tough one to stack up side by side. So we'll see what happens, but really cool honor for Kyle Dubas to be named to that staff for both Four Nations as well as the Olympics. So we're going to be following that just like we would anyway, because going to be a lot of Penguin representation on the international stage over the next 2 years, but that will do it for our first segment. When we come back, Kevin Hayes met with the media on Tuesday. Hunter and I are going to look at some of his comments, and we have learned, just like a lot of players coming to the Penguins this year, he is one motivated guy. But before we do that, we have to tell you about our first sponsor, and that is FanDuel. I love sports, and I love them so much that I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports are no longer sportsing the way I like them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up any bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, welcome back to the Wednesday edition of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm Patrick Damp, joined as always by the illustrious Hunter Hodes. It is my last episode before I go on vacation, which we will talk about once we wrap this show up. But before we have our cheery goodbyes, before I walk away for a few days, we got to talk about a guy who's walking in the door this season, and that is Kevin Hayes. He had a lot to say on Tuesday, and very similar to what we were talking about with Matt Grzelcyk last week. This is a guy who feels like he has been cast aside. People no longer consider him to be an effective NHL player. And while the jury may still be out on that, in their heads, they think they still got a lot to prove. The biggest thing that stood out to me was him saying this: I think I can still produce in this league, and I want to show that to my teammates and the coaching staff. Now, I understand. Very generic, very canned quote from a guy who's been in the league for a while. And me saying it on this show, reading it in an article, does not do it justice. If you can go on the Penguins website and watch his availability, you could hear it in the tone of his voice. He is not happy with how things ended in Philly and how things ended in St. Louis. So if he can get back to even a little bit of the level he was at just a couple of years ago, this could be a great return on investment for Kyle Dubas.
I'm telling you, man, a very motivated player is dangerous. And I do think you're going to see Kevin Hayes at least get a bit better this year for the Penguins. Do I expect him to be the player that he was during 2022-2023 when he had 18 goals and 54 points in 81 games? No. But if he's still around, 40 to 45 points for the Penguins as their third line center, maybe even getting closer to 50, I will gladly take that, just because of how awful the third line has been these last couple of years for the Penguins. They have really been searching for a true bona fide third line center for the last couple of years. They really haven't been able to find it. I think Eller in sports last year was pretty sound in that role, but I've said for a while, I've wanted them to upgrade over him and slide Eller down to the fourth line. It looks like they've done that, especially if Hayes can get back to the level that he's played at times in his career. And again, I don't know if he's going to, but if he can get close, that would be a big deal for me overall. But again, you put a playmaker on that line, someone that can dish the puck to someone like a Valtteri Pustin, maybe someone like a Drew O'Connor if he starts there. That makes a lot of sense to me. But I really do like that move for the Penguins. I said it at the time. I think this has an opportunity to be one of the more underrated good moves that Kyle Dubas made this offseason. And one of the numbers that really stood out to me this past season when he was with the Blues was 36 goals for him on the ice, 35 goals against. And that's on a Blues team that was horrendous defensively. Now you come to a Penguins team that is at least a bit better defensively. I think you're going to see that number jump up. And also 23 high danger goals for, 19 high danger goals against. I think you're going to see a jump in that number as well, especially if he can produce a bit more offense on that line, and while he's also playing next to better line mates compared to what he had in St. Louis.
Yeah, you kind of beat me to the punch on that. That was something I was going to bring up. If you look at his top line statistics from this past year, they are wholly unimpressive. He was not good if you just look at the counting stats, but you pop the hood open, you look under it, and you see that on a pretty bad Blues team, he was among their top forwards in expected goals, goal differential, expected goals, and you look at that too as well. He had 0.74 goals per 60 at 5-on-5, which was the highest mark he's had since 1920. And then his individual expected goals per 60, third highest mark of his career, all while on a Blues team that was not very good. So if he can get himself on a third line with, say, a Valtteri Puustinen or even Drew O'Connor, if he moves down and they find another winger for the top six, we could be in business here. And while, again, I don't expect him to get back to some pre-2020, 2019 level that we saw him at in his run with the Rangers and Flyers, you still could have a very valuable third line center who is going to bring some offensive output to a bottom six that has really been lacking for the last few years. And really ever since this team won the Stanley Cup in 2017, because you think back to those years and their biggest hallmark was that they could beat you with all four lines. Yeah, the top two lines, the Crosby line and the Malkin line, they were going to do their thing. They were going to get their cookies. They were going to score. But it was the fact that you could no longer play the Penguins and go, okay, if we shut down Crosby and Malkin, we shut down the Penguins. It was, well, if we shut down Crosby and Malkin, well, here comes HBK. Well, if we shut down all three of them, well, here comes Matt Cullen's line. So while I'm not pretending like the Penguins are back to that point, if you have another line on your offense that can at least produce a little bit and take the burden off of the top six, at the very least, you can make yourself a playoff team.
I agree. I mean, we've been wanting the bottom six to be a lot better these last couple of years. I mean, there was a reason why I loved this team's bottom six at the very end of the Jim Rutherford era, and even during the start of the Ron Hextall era, just because they had those lines that can score. They had players down there that were able to produce offensively and play well in their own zone. They just kind of went away from that these last couple of years by trying to get more defensive specialists overall, but not enough players that can chip in offensively when the top two lines go cold. Kevin Hayes, when he's playing well, he can chip in offensively. He's a good playmaker. He can score at times as well. And you want to know someone else who I could see on his line at some point? Jesse Puljujarvi. I could see with his net front presence, the way he's also having a full offseason to train after coming off that double hip surgery last year. I think he could be a line for at least a bit of a better year with the Penguins this year, and he could be getting some third line minutes if he starts out the season playing fairly well. But I could see that fit going well for the Penguins if they were to try Puljujarvi with Hayes, considering that Puljujarvi, he can also finish chances, especially right around that net front area, 5, 10, maybe 15 feet out overall.
And I would love to see a bounce back for Puljujarvi, because even for as much as he has struggled in his career, I've always really liked his game. And I still think he's young enough that there is some untapped ability there that if he gets some consistency, he very much could find. Now, will he ever live up to being the 4th overall pick? I don't think so. But can he be a very productive NHL player? I absolutely think he can. One other thing I wanted to say about Kevin Hayes before we wrap up this segment is his last two quotes from that presser. It's July 24th as we record this, and I want them to drop the puck right now with these quotes. It's definitely an ego shot when you go on 2 teams in 2 years. I'm a pretty confident person, and I've been in the league for a long time. I've had successful seasons. I know what I need to do to make sure my game works in this league. I think I'll have a good opportunity in Pittsburgh to do that. I think, though, instead of it being an ego shot, I'll use it as more motivation to show those 2 teams I can still play and produce in this league. And you said it right off the hop in this segment, man. A motivated player is a dangerous player. And when you combine it with the type of game that Kevin Hayes plays, this is the shot in the arm this Penguins team has needed in a while, because he's not just going to go out and make good passes and go to the front of the net. He's going to run a few people over. And we see it all the time. You see it in highlights. You see it in mic'd up segments. When a guy throws a big hit, that brings the juice for the whole team, man.
Oh, and the fans here love it. I mean, anytime a player on this team throws a big hit, you see PPG Paints Arena going crazy. So when that happens with Hayes, I mean, that's only going to be the start, I think, of potentially maybe him at least becoming a small fan favorite here, just with the way he plays overall. But I'm excited, man. I really hope that he can get close to the level that he's played at before, or even fully back to that level, as I said a couple of times during this episode.
Yeah, that'll be really cool. And last thing before we wrap the segment, just really nice to see Kevin Hayes on the right side of the Metropolitan Division rivalries he's been part of for the past decade or so. Because as a Ranger, as a Flyer, he absolutely tortured us. And I'm just glad to have him in our sweater now rather than red and blue or orange and black. So
he can go torture them now, baby.
Yeah, exactly. So excited to see what he brings this year. Definitely another press conference where a guy conducted himself and made me feel just a little bit better about the signing and the trade. So we will see what happens with Kevin Hayes, but we've got one more thing to cover before we wrap up this show. The Penguins lose another member of their front office, but I'll be honest, don't think it's that big of a loss. Hunter and I are going to talk about that right after this. All right, welcome back to the Wednesday edition of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm Patrick Damp. That's Hunter Hodes, and Penguins lose another member of their front office today, reported by our good pal Josh Yohe, who I hear rumor may return to the show relatively soon.
Yes, so because Pat is being a lame-o and is going on vacation on Thursday, how dare he do that, by the way? I mean, have I done that yet, people? No, I'm just joking around. He's allowed to go on a vacation here, people. But yes, Josh Yohe is coming on the show once again Thursday, 10 a.m. The episode will probably be out around noon or 1 o'clock on Thursday for you all. We're going to discuss the offseason so far, get Josh's thoughts on everything the Penguins have done, get his thoughts on what else could be coming, and a whole bunch more in Penguins land. So be sure to stick around for that coming on Thursday.
So anyway, what Josh reported this afternoon is that the Penguins director of amateur scouting, Nick Pryor, is going to be leaving the Penguins organization and heading to the Colorado Avalanche as a member of their amateur scouting department. And he has been with the team since 2021. He was part of the Hextall Burke era, and he definitely had some good hits. You think about guys like Owen Pickering and Braden Yeager, draft picks that were made under his watch. But with the Penguins adding Wes Clark to their staff earlier this summer, I don't think it's that big of a loss. I think that this is one of the last holdovers from the prior management that we kind of figured would not be here all that long. While I don't think he did a poor job, I think at this point, this is another sign of Kyle Dubas wanting it to be his staff rather than keeping some people around.
Agreed. I thought this move was going to happen last year. I was kind of surprised that it didn't. I mean, we all got to see firsthand that Kyle Dubas respected Nick Pryor's work, and I thought Pryor was doing a pretty solid job under Dubas in these last couple of drafts. But when the Colorado Avalanche of all teams come calling, I mean, you got to listen. And obviously he did. He's going to get to run their amateur scouting department. That, I think, is a promotion for him overall. So congratulations to him. With Wes Clark being here, I think it made a lot of sense for Pryor to kind of just go do his own thing. He can run the amateur scouting department for Colorado, a team that has drafted really well over the years. They are a very well-run organization with Chris McFarland at the top, as well as Joe Sakic. I think that's a good fit for him overall, and I wish him all the best.
Yeah, and we love seeing people get promotions. I mean, especially in that era, in that area of front office staff, because those really are the unheralded heroes, especially of championship winning teams, because their entire job in a cap world is to go find those prospects and those hidden gems that you can get on your roster for, $2 million or less, or guys who make noise as young players. You don't have to open the bank vault for them, and they can supplant some great talent, which we know. You look at a lot of the previous Stanley Cup champions over the past decade or so, and some of the biggest heroes are guys who you hadn't really heard of. Everybody thinks of the meme for the Penguins in 2016 and 2017, the "who the is Brian Rust" meme. And he's grown into being one of the better players in the NHL. But at the time, it was a guy nobody was talking about. It was a guy nobody knew who he was. And he came up and was a huge part, along with guys like Connor Sherry and Tom Kuhnhackl and Scott Wilson, who all played big roles in winning a championship, but they weren't first round draft picks. They weren't big time free agent acquisitions. They were homegrown talent. And that is really the biggest thing that you need to be a successful organization in the modern era.
100%. I mean, you have to be able to draft at least reasonably well if you want to, contend for Stanley Cups. Obviously, the Florida Panthers, what they did is going to be hard to replicate just because a lot of their players that they got are through trades. There's only a couple of players that are kind of homegrown there. One of them obviously being Alexander Barkov. But for most of the other teams in this league, you have to do well at drafting. And I do think with how Colorado has done over these last several years, I think going there just makes a ton of sense for him. And now a lot of the scouting staff and just a lot of the staff in general has been turned over these last couple of years. And we'll have to see if more moves are made for Kyle Dubas' staff.
Absolutely. But this will do it for the Wednesday edition of the Locked On Penguins podcast. Thank you, as always, for making us part of your daily routine and hanging with us sickos in the dog days of summer as we talk hockey when there's not a lot of hockey going on. And as Hunter said, this will be my last episode for a few days as I'm heading out on vacation. But you guys have been listening to this for so long. When Hunter's in control, this show's absolutely elite. He's already telling you he's going to have Josh Yohe on tomorrow. And when Josh comes on, it's always a banger of an episode. He's also going to have plenty more for you guys while I go get sunburnt on the beach. But for Hunter Hodes, I am Patrick Damp. Thank you as always for tuning in. Hunter will be back with a new episode with Josh Yohe for you guys on Thursday. Until then, thanks as always for listening, and we will be back on Thursday.